I'm Robin Miller Brecker.
And I'm Karen Lenzer. Welcome to Seeking Center, the podcast.
Join us each week as we have the conversations and weed through the spiritual and holistic clutter for you. We'll boil it down to what you need to know now.
We're all about total wellness, which to us means building a healthy life on a physical, mental, and spiritual level. We'll talk to the trailblazers who will introduce you to the practices, products, and experiences that may be just what you need to hear about to transform your life.
If you're listening to this, it's no accident. Think of this as your seeking center and your place to seek your center. And for even more mega inspo, sign up for Seeking Center, the newsletter at seekingcenter.app. We had such a magical connection with Jeanette Biro on our podcast a few weeks ago that she kept coming up in so many of our conversations. We both dove into her book, Avalon to Aurora, which chronicles her near-death experience that catapulted her to new levels as a medium, visionary, and healer. We were both captivated by one particular chapter with its juicy title, Deathwalkers, Soul Aspects, Walk-ins, and Fusions. And we equally felt like we needed to know more. So we asked, and Jeanette graciously accepted to give us the full download on that and so much more. Can you say time jumping? Get ready.
Well, Jeanette, first and foremost, Robin and I have been digging into your book. I had read some of it. I hadn't had the chance to read the whole entire thing. So after our conversation, I wanted to sit with it now that I knew your story and really absorb it. There's so much in here. I love the fact that these chapters are so short and they're so focused. And you not only give people your perspective, but things that they can think about too along the way. One of the chapters that really got us going was your chapter 16, which is entitled Deathwalkers, Soul Aspects, Walk-ins, and Fusions. This chapter is all maybe 6 pages long, and there's so much in here. And I just was hoping that maybe we could just dive in a little bit about what each one of them are and maybe your experiences with those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe start with what a death walker sounds really ominous.
Yes.
But what is your definition?
Yeah, deathwalkers do sound ominous. And I remember when they came in and told me who they were, I kind of half chuckled, half shuddered because I was like, really? That's what you call yourselves? And they're like, well, it's the best way to explain it. Spirit is often very blunt. And so they're trying to use English language to explain what they do, right? Their energy is so different. Their energy is so peaceful, very omniscient, very loving and wise, but they're trying to use our English language to bring a point of what they do, which literally they help prepare souls when they're going to cross over. And part of that preparation is essentially pulling all the fragments of a soul together when they're fully ready to exit. So what I mean by that is if we think about parallel lifetimes or multiple realities, when our soul comes down, a piece of our soul comes down to be inhabited as you guys or me, we are more than just this one timeline speaking together right now. We actually, that soul piece fragments into multiple parallel realities. So we're existing in multiple realities beyond this one right here. So what happens is when the soul dies, they essentially have to do a process of dying in each timeline before the full soul crosses over. And so the Deathwalkers help to make that happen. They help to gather all the soul aspects because within each parallel life or multiple reality that we exist in, we can be the same person, but say in one life, I am me as I am right now, but in another life, say I'm dealing with a certain trauma that's keeping me looped in something and I'm not ready to exit, or I'm avoiding an exit or something like that. They try to help blend between realms and realities, the ascension and crossing over of a soul. Now, that takes our idea of death and just blows it even wider. It's hard for the mind to put that in linear format that we like to use to make sense of everything. So that's why when they came through, they're like, we are Deathwalkers, and essentially we just help people get ready to cross over. And so I was like, tell me more. And then they split it into all of that. So they're very loving though, and they really are working in favor of each soul so that the crossing can happen with ease and grace, because that whole idea of the fact that we never die alone, we don't die in punishment, all these linear human-based ideas, there is a collaboration of synchronicities, of events, of guides, spirits, angels, whatever it may be, to help us move through it, just in the same way that we collaborate in essence when we are giving birth. There's a collaboration, ideally, of people that can help support us, our bodies are getting ready, all this kind of stuff. There's a similar readiness and collaboration that happens when we are exiting.
If someone were to recognize a death walker, would that mean that you, in a linear format, let's say in this timeline, would that mean you have a short amount of time before you're going to pass? Is it a month or is it days?
Not necessarily, no. Somebody can pass in one lifetime, one parallel version, and then live in another one for years and years and years. Now, we can also, though, merge lifetimes together too. So we don't necessarily have to die off in one to merge into another. We can merge two timelines together, or 3, or 4. They say an ascended master is someone that was able to merge all of their lifetimes together into wholeness and then transcend the need to come back. So we do have that potentials within us to merge lifetimes. I only say that because we don't necessarily only die out of lifetimes. We can sometimes merge those parallel realities. So for example, somebody, if you had 3 people, one person could have, say, 8 multiple realities they're living as a fragment in each. Somebody else could have 3 because maybe 2 of them they died from, and then 2 or however many left, they merged. And then one other person could be living in 3 solid ones that have all merged into 3. So vast and varied in that kind of quantum reality.
Well, and going back to the death walker, would you recognize somebody as being a death walker? Is it a spirit or do they inhabit someone's physical body?
No, they're a spirit. They're spirit-based for sure. Most people wouldn't see them. They really walk between realms.
Okay.
And then that's another concept, is walking between dimensions. It's not just one dimension to another. There's actually space. There's a liminal space in between realms or dimensions, and they move through that space.
I just want to make sure I understand. So you're saying that there's the potential of 3 different Robins living in this time-space reality right now. One is the Robin who lives in Chicago. Maybe another potential Robin could be an executive who works in New York City, and another could be maybe even older or younger, but in sort of the same time frame. And that Robin in Chicago could pass, but the other 2 Robins could still be continuing. They're not aware of each other on a physical level, but they're doing this experience to gain as much earthly experience as possible within a short window of time to make the most of this physical experience.
Absolutely.
And the 3 Robins, let's say that Karen's talking about, would I be Robin in one, but called something else in another? Could I have a different name?
It could be, but not limited to. You could have, for example, a future Robin from another parallel lifetime in which you are older in, step into this lifetime and technically communicate with you as a person. That would be if you moved through a time glitch. And we talk about, well, there's much out there about time glitches in realities where something glitched, something wasn't as it was. People could technically appear in another timeline, although that's a dangerous thing that's often prevented, because if the future Robin told you something, then that could change the Robin now to then change the future Robin.
Right.
Right. So it's mind bending.
This is like a movie that really exists that we thought was fantasy, but is real. And just to clarify too, Jeanette, I know we talked a little bit about this on our last podcast, but just for people who are listening now, when you say they tell me, what do you mean by they? Are you hearing this information? How are you getting this information?
Yeah, it's my guides. It's my spirit guides. So there's various different ones that I work with. So it just kind of depends on if we're working on a collective humanity level, if we're working on more of a cosmic level of consciousness, or my own personal guide. So just, it depends who it is. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and the reason I was asking about the names too is when we talk about souls, fragments of our soul being in these different places, could those fragments be inhabited by a male energy? Could I be a man in a different timeline? I'm just trying to make sure that when people are listening right now and we're talking about these multiple lives and parallel lives, are we meaning parallel, like from this very much like a copy of me, but with different experiences happening? Or is it part of my soul, but in a completely different type person? I guess that's what I'm trying to.
So as as you're asking that question, I'm kind of passing it off to my guides because I'm like, oh, good question. I'm curious about that. To say that it is limited to only one way would be naive, but on average, the majority of the time would be a singular incarnation of Robin divided into many.
That's
right?
really helpful. That's helpful.
Yeah, that helps me too.
But I always caution not to limit to a black and white statement because, again, even just thinking of time in our construct of time, and then when we open to quantum physics, we realize time isn't that. So to limit time to black and white, we can't. So that would be our understanding as best as we can understand it right now within our consciousness. So for the majority of it would be you split into many.
And we're going to get to the others, but one last question on this one, because it's so fascinating about these different soul aspects. When you cross over and you're doing your life review, are you able at all to infuse any kind of your life experience to the one that is still walking in the physical form? Is that in any way handed to the guide that's guiding the Karen that's still walking around, or is it totally separate?
No, so what I've understood right now is most often a soul will pass within a general amount of time so that the whole thing can cross over and return to the light. So when we lose somebody here, they do essentially have a process of crossing over. Now, whether they cross over and then merge in with another timeline is a different story. I have seen, though, in some cases, I had a client, actually I talk about it in the book, where she had a soul fragment of hers merge into her in this lifetime because it would benefit her. So that one was a direct merging. And now in that case, she could technically disappear from another timeline. She could just cease to exist or disappear as a missing person. In one way, that's how it could be. Another way, she could cease to exist ever in that timeline.
Wow. I mean, and I want to just share on page 64, we put this really simple illustration that helped me understand what you're talking about. That if you think about your higher self, or I guess your soul really, as one big circle, and then a little piece of pie can just be this one version of yourself. And so this circle can have many pieces of pie to it that sort of break off and have their own experiences. And I just thought that that was just such a nice, simple, easy way to kind of get a very, very deep and hard concept, I think, for all of us to wrap our heads around. So it's just a little helpful tidbit there. Should we move on to soul aspects? Soul.
Yeah. So soul aspects can be like different aspects of our soul. So if we go back to that higher self image there, we can kind of explain it that way, where different soul aspects of you can come down and merge with yourself as well. So your higher self, which is always a part of you, if we just, for the sake of simplicity, your higher self sits in the higher realms or in heaven on the other side, whatever makes sense. And it's watching over you as a fragment of you is busy doing your thing here. If your higher self feels that at the point in your life you would benefit from a knowing or a learning, it will essentially bring down through like a download or a merging a different soul aspect of you to merge in with your frequency. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
We have access to that all the time. The more that we actually grow and connect in with our higher self and our spiritual self or awakened self, we're connecting to more of those soul aspects. Those are available to us really at any time.
Can we ask our angels, guides? Can we ask for that information be accessible to us specifically? I love that idea. Okay. This is a big one, the walk-ins.
And I love the way you define, because I've heard it in other ways, but I love the way that you define it.
Yeah. So a walk-in is when essentially another soul steps into your physical. Now, let me break that down because that seems really ominous and like it's poltergeist or something, but it's not at all. A walk-in only happens when it is agreed upon within the blueprint before you come in. So a walk-in scenario is something that your soul already agreed with another soul, that there would be a point in your lifetime where the two would change places. So we have the natal soul, which is the one that comes in and is born into the body, does the growing up. And then there will be a walk-in soul that will come in at a certain juncture point and essentially take over the energy of the body and carry forward. Now, a natal soul will usually come in that role. For one thing, is be willing to bring the energy up to an adult level, usually is when walk-ins happen, because the forgetting, the childhood traumas, the remembering, the figuring who you are, that's a lot of dense work that sometimes a higher soul does not want to do. And so a natal soul might say, say, hey, I need to learn a couple lessons of early childhood, and this family, this alignment might work out, but I would like to exit around, say, for example, 25. And then there's another soul that's like, you know what, that's perfect, because I would like to come in at 25 and I need to do these things, but I don't have time, or I don't want to go through the growing up phase. Okay, perfect. We will make an agreement. There will be a handoff at some point. Now that handoff or walk-in soul sometimes can happen very abruptly. It can happen through a accident, coma, near-death experience, but sometimes they can also happen when someone's sleeping. Again, this is never a forceful takeover. You can't be taken away by a walk-in. It is a known process on the higher realm. So I want people, when they're listening, not to feel threatened by the idea of a walk-in. Now, when that walk-in occurs, sometimes it can be a full-on exchange. One comes in, the other leaves. It happens then, it is done. That is usually a bit more jarring for the walk-in soul, because they then essentially have to suddenly take over command. They have all the memories, all the knowings of before, but they don't have the practical experience. So that's more jarring. So what often happens is you will have a soul blend for a while, where the walk-in and the natal soul will actually share the energy of the body anywhere for a couple months to a couple years before the natal soul then finally takes off. And what happens is that allows time for the natal soul to essentially teach the walk-in soul the workings of the vehicle and the workings of the relationships in their life, and it makes it an easier transition. But anytime that there's a walk-in, there will be a significant change of lifestyle, food habits, sometimes languages, career, oftentimes relationships will change significantly when a walk-in comes in, because the walk-in essentially comes in, takes over. Like when a new CEO comes in and resets a company, they restructure it. That's often what happens with the purpose of the ascension moving forward. So the one thing I do want to say with walk-ins is most people will know they're a walk-in. They will either listen to what I'm saying and there'll be deep resonance of like, whoa, click, 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 that makes sense, or I already knew this, or something like that. There's a knowing. So walk-ins aren't often left floundering like, what's going on? There's usually some knowing of something very different. And it's a matter of just gaining the information to have it fully click in place. So that's kind of what happens in a walk-in. I've seen several different walk-ins in my life, and there's a pretty consistent general pattern with them. So it's really interesting.
Wow. When you're talking, I feel like we know people in our own lives where you can tell that there's been such a dramatic shift. You almost are like, but can people really change that much? And that, to me, this helps answer that.
Or if it's after maybe a radical, they give up drugs or something.
Yes, something completely. Yeah, that's what I mean.
A brand new person, literally. Wow.
Sometimes though, there'll be like a soul fusion. And so a soul fusion is another term, which is kind of like a walk-in, but it's for only a short amount of time. It's for a period of time that the natal soul will be like, I will step back for a period of 5 to 8 years-ish, say, right? Where another soul can fuse in and embody for a time and then depart. And so that one is more common than we realize, not as common as a walk-in though, because there's a big shift in energy that happens that the person has to recalibrate to. So sometimes that can be the reason for someone's change. Now, another one that's not in my book that I just recently did a podcast on my show about is soul imprints. And a soul imprint is essentially when a spirit in the blueprint planning, instead of having a walk-in occur, they will actually look in the Akashic records of all souls, and based on what they're desiring to come in with, will borrow the memories of another soul like a transparency or an imprint. And they will imprint that knowing or memory into their consciousness so that they are inspired by that moving forward. But it is not their memory, but it would feel like their memory, but it gives them the courage moving forward. So that's when you get people that come through and they're like, I'm the reincarnation of so-and-so, of Buddha, of Jesus, of, I think I used Joan of Arc in my podcast as the example. And it's not necessarily that they are, but they have the imprint of a section of time of that soul's journey that will benefit them coming forward.
Wow, that is really cool.
Now, the interesting thing is that these are all different ways, and there's more that we probably can't even conceive of. The one thing that Spirit said is they're like, after all of this, essentially we're breaking it down, but it actually doesn't matter. Whether you're a walk-in, an imprint, a fusion, what matters is you take the knowledge of you get to know you, and you live your purpose here now. This just gives you framework for maybe understanding part of your journey, but they're like, no matter how you do it, you're here at this time right now to take what you know and do and change things, transcend things, be an example for humanity. So they're just providing highlights to kind of help us wrap our minds around it, but really they want us to essentially just move forward.
Can I ask a question? This came up when Robert and I were talking about this the other day about the timelines again. If you're living multiple timelines at the same time, does it explain to a certain extent why maybe somebody feels very disconnected from their family, or they feel they don't belong where they are, or they're feeling lost, or because they are more immersed in some way with another timeline? Maybe they're very connected there. So when they're conscious of this timeline, they're feeling that almost lack of you don't have.
It could be. I think it's more to do, it's a piece with timelines, but it's actually more to do with the ascension process. And so as we're ascending in consciousness right now, we're actually expanding our reach in terms of what we're aware of. Now, we're not aware of everything fully consciously, but energetically we are. So we're actually reaching farther out through timelines right now. So that disconnect is often actually feeling we are more than this timeline. We're actually feeling the pulls and the waves of different timelines as they move. So we may say our energy is really needed in a trauma situation in, say, timeline A, but where we're talking right now is timeline B. So you might feel spacey in timeline B because so much of your energy is being drawn to timeline A because in that one there's a trauma, there's a family trauma or something, right? You're becoming more energetically aware of the multifaceted nature that is you. So this awareness is like a natural progression, actually, is what Spirit was saying. It's just part of being expanded through multiple realms. It's a normal way of being in 5D, apparently.
Well, and my comment would be, as people are listening, this is all possible because we're energy. And so energy can travel when we're talking about ourselves in these multiple timelines, and we're talking about these different definitions of ways of coming into a soul. It's all possible because it's energy. Second thing I want to ask is, from your own experience with a near-death experience, and you saw your blueprint for your soul. We talk about the blueprint for your soul, and then we talk about your soul being fragmented into different timelines. So all those fragments share that same blueprint like that you saw when you were in your near-death experience. Is that still the baseline?
That's a fantastic question. And what's interesting is, in my memory of that, which I haven't pondered until right now, so love you're asking this, is when they rolled my blueprint on the table, there was several blueprints underneath rolled on top. So we were looking at the main frame design, but there was several other ones underneath. So whatever's changed in the main frame design would then have ripple effects through the ones underneath. Because it was
yeah.
Wow. So when an architect rolls out the blueprints for a building, there's multiple in that roll layered on top of each other. It was like that.
Wow. You had what most of us won't ever have in a lifetime, which is this peek into all of the inner workings and then being able to come back and talk about it. So
that's my desire, is to talk about it. I'm so grateful my guides break down stuff in really tangible ways that I can understand it and then share with you guys or in my book, because what they're wanting to do, the whole reason for all of this and why there's many people on the planet right now bringing through different concepts of consciousness is because when we can click these into making sense somehow, even if we're understanding a small percentage of the reality, the cosmic reality, our linear human minds are like, yeah, I get that. Every time we click into that, we're creating this. Essentially what they're saying is the knowledge then becomes available in the ethers. There's always knowledge sitting in the energy around the collective. When Spirit wants to inspire the planet for something, they bring down a higher knowledge that sits floating in this collective grid, if you want to picture it that way. And what happens is people that then are awakened or higher frequency will pick up on these pieces of knowledge and bring them into reality and bring them down. The more that we anchor pieces into a reality, the higher we can then reach knowledge. And that's just all connected into that process of ascension.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Everything you say just blows my mind, one sentence after another. And yet it makes so much sense.
Oh, it's beautiful. I'm so glad. I know, but I feel the same too. I got to say, when they explain stuff, I'm like, wow, so cool. Yes, that makes sense. Right. So, and they love when we have these moments, these click moments, they love it because they're like, yes, you're getting it. It's like when a parent's teaching a child and you see your child finally get it. You're like, oh, Yeah, right. So it's just these levels of growth and ascension on the greater cosmic scale that are happening. And it's important, I think, as humanity that we realize that so we can also feel a sense of accomplishment and a sense of connection in that, because there's so much that could weigh us down that actually pulls us away from ascension right now that we need to celebrate in the click moments, in the understanding, in the raising of our consciousness.
Well, and Karen and I were talking about this, what you introduced last time we spoke, which was this idea that June was going to be this month where spirit may not feel as present because time's shifting again. Now that we're in June, are you feeling that, sensing that? What's the update?
Yeah. So what's interesting is there's a whole restructuring of time happening right now. So they're essentially restructuring the energetic model of time on our planet. That's the best way I can explain it, so that it doesn't have the ability to be manipulated as it did before. There were different levels of light beings that knew how to manipulate time, because again, time is not linear. We think it is, but it is not. But there are also people on this planet that have that intelligence to manipulate time. So we don't realize how much time has actually been messed around, which really makes it hard for humanity when we move through time like that, when it is kind of rewound or paused. Now, with June, what's interesting is Spirit they're still in the midst of it. There's something that shifts or ideally clicks around the solstice coming up on the 21st. There will be a click point of sorts, but I don't know what that's going to feel like yet. They're basically telling me just be super present and see what happens. By the end of June, I'm seeing around June 28th, we'll be able to start feeling into where we're going. So something clicks in. I would imagine it takes a little bit of time to rise and show itself. And that's why by the 28th, we'll have a better idea. But there's a huge significance this year with the solstice and that energy. So a good message for everybody is on the solstice, the more that you can anchor in your truth. Like if you wake up the morning of the solstice and you're like, okay, today I am going to honor who I am. I'm going to move through this day with as much peace as I can. I am going to take the moments I need to recalibrate. I'm going to be present. I'm going to find joy, and I'm going to envision anchoring this energy here. What you're doing then is providing an anchor essentially for this timeline to click in faster. If we're not so busy running around missing everything, then we can help anchor it. Literally, we don't realize how much our physical bodies act as anchor points of consciousness. We don't realize that. And when we actually embody that, we make a big difference in creating this tipping point of ascension.
Oh, I love that. And there's a healer that we work with that she takes your root chakra and she anchors that into the earth. So I would ask that everyone do that with what you're saying. And actually this podcast is posting within the morning of the solstice, and it will be up for most people in Northern America on the solstice.
It's so timely.
We're clicking in, and then we can't wait to then find out how are we doing come July, really, because it sounds like we're going to feel something different, and we'll on a conscious level potentially feel it.
One of the things that they gave me as a heads up with that is part of that feeling something different is we will have a better idea or a better ability to feel into intuitions. For example, when you're trying to decide, say, should I take job A or B? I'm presented with two. You will sit on average and feel into it, right? What am I feeling more drawn to? Right now in this month, that would be hard to do right now because the timeline or the construct of time that affects our timelines is being restructured. So we can't feel into it yet. But by July, we'll have a better ability to feel into highest probabilities of our journey.
That's so mind-blowing. Karen and I have been doing certain meditations, and it's interesting because we've been trying to do some time shifting ourselves. And if we say, let's shift into a year from now, both Karen and I are like, we can't. We just literally can't. These last few weeks, it feels, Karen used the word abyss.
It's not available. It's actually not available. The content is not available right now.
Yes. Oh my God. Are you freaking out, Karen?
It's a little what I said, because we were trying to do this right before we talked to you, this meditation. And we were trying to decide, should we go to a certain place that we've already sort of created in our mind's eye that feels very concrete to us now versus just like next year at this time, and I just said, it's too hard. I can't do it.
And so I love what you said, Jeanette. It's like content not available.
Yeah.
Wow.
So interesting. Well, I'm going to do that exercise for sure.
With the grounding and the anchoring, a good thing for people of embracing that energy to simplify it would be in an energy of love. How can you be love? How can you give love that day? And just keep coming back to that. Anchor love.
I love that.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Jeanette, thank you so much.
I wanted to let everybody know that they should listen to Jeanette's podcast. Where can they find your podcast?
That's on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, YouTube, Audible, all the main audio platforms. It's called the Jeanette Biro Podcast.
And they can get it too through avalonspirit.com as well, right?
Yeah, I posted on there too. Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. And you can find out more from Jeanette on Avalon Spirit, including her book and all other offerings that she has. Oh my God. Thank you so much for jumping on with us today.
Thanks for having me. What a
That's a
beautiful
great conversation. I'm going to have to play it a couple times back.
I
myself.
agree.
Really looking forward to the solstice exercise. That was just perfectly timed.
All right,
Thank you,
ladies.
Jeanette.
Well, have a beautiful rest of your day.
You too.